So this morning I had a tiny little seed, but I set it down somewhere in the flurry of things happening before worship, and I have no idea where I set it down, and because it's a little seed, I doubt that I'll find it, but maybe you will as you move around later. But imagine that I have a little seed or an acorn or a fig seed here. I would have asked you, what do you see when you look at that? When you see a seed of some sort, what do you see? I'm actually going to ask you to respond. Not rhetorical. What do you see when you see a seed? You see potential. Okay. Good answer. Came ready. You see food, did someone say? Okay. Opportunity. None of you, if you're being really honest, just looks at that seed and just sees a seed? You all just really go immediately to that potential place, huh? All right, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but part of me has some questions. Because I know if I'm being honest, usually I just see a seed. Maybe I see something that I could eat, use, consume. I don't know. What about when you see a bare tree, some branches like this? What do you see? Dormancy? Anticipation. What's that? You see a tree. Good. Good answer. You see death? Okay, now I think we're getting a little more honest. Yeah, you wonder if it's actually alive or if it might be dead. But it feels like we don't know, right? Yeah. What about when you see a giant tree, like some of those outlining the street, what do you see? A bill. Turning blanks. Okay, we've got a woodmaker out there. Strength. Someone said history. No, it's seen a few things. Yeah, do you ever look at a fully grown, healthy tree and ever wonder if it too began, right, as that seed, or like working backwards, not from seed to potential, but from potential back to that was once just that tiny little seed, or look at that and see, I wonder if it ever had a season where we wondered, is this thing dead or alive? Did it have a season where it struggled to grow? And you couldn't know just by looking at it what the history was that it had all endured? Or have you ever looked at something like that and wondered about all of the hands or the creatures, the organisms, that ecosystem around it that nurtured it and allowed it to get to that point? Or do you look at the tree and you just see a standalone tree? And dang, if that thing got that big, we just think, wow, that tree is amazing. As if it grew to that place all on its own. In our devotionals in the back, which we still have a few more copies of, you're invited to take those during the prayer stations, take one home with you. But the person reflecting for this week on this passage, Jeff Chu, tells his own little gardening story. He says, 2 years ago, I planted asparagus crowns, and the farmer who sold them to me said, you're going to have to wait a couple of years to harvest those, right? Of course, he responded, because like any responsible person, the thought of growing asparagus was immediately followed by pulling out his phone and Googling how to grow asparagus. But still, the next spring, he continues, when that slender spear rose from the midst of the previous autumn's fallen leaves, he says, I could barely restrain myself from harvesting it. I immediately began to imagine charring asparagus and squeezing some lemon over it, grating some Parmesan on top. We go immediately to that potential, right? Ooh, how about a slightly runny fried egg over it? Some of you look like you're ready for second breakfast. Then I remembered the Farmer's Council, he added. You know you'll have to wait a couple of years, right? And so after briefly congratulating myself for my self-control, I tucked my dream back into the vault of future possibility. It wasn't yet time for our homegrown asparagus. It needed that year and then another to concentrate on its largely invisible labor, finding purchase in the soil, extending its roots, gathering strength to flourish. And like that asparagus, the fig tree in Jesus' parable can't be rushed. Now, Jesus' original audience would have been a more agriculturally sophisticated audience. They would have known that a fig seedling, like many other fruit trees, if you've ever tried to plant a tree, needs several years to bear fruit. And they might have even found the vineyard owner's question laughable, right? They would have understood that the absence of fruit on a young tree wasn't a sign of failure. Maturity takes time and care. It takes both attention and patience. And yet, how often are we as our society like that vineyard owner? If we're honest, I'm sure that beneath any laughter at the vineyard owner's ridiculousness is at least a hint of recognition. I mean, in our house, we are plant people. They fill every room inside, and we garden outside. And yet, I also know the desire for being able to just simply purchase the plant that is already fully grown, ready to bear fruit or flowers, rather than having to wait all season, not to mention years. Years? Not to mention the consistent intention, the weekly, sometimes daily devotion that it takes to nurture it over those years. Time alone doesn't do it. Even my wife, who loves to plant from seed each year as we garden, laughs as she, I think every year, tells about how she'll plant a seed one day, and then a day or two later is already digging up around it, just checking to see, is it beginning to sprout? Is it beginning to grow some roots? But perhaps a bit anxiously and excitedly, but definitely impatiently unearthing it. Right? We know it's ridiculous, and yet it is hard to wait. And so if we're honest, we also know that we are like that fig tree, that it's not so different for you and me. And so we live in this sort of catch-22. We know that, like the fig tree, we need time to mature, to grow, to produce fruit. We need years of steady, sturdy, patient hands tending to our roots. And yet, we expect toddlers, for instance, to simply be quiet or control their impulses just because we told them no. Or we need teenagers to comply in obedience just because we said so. But if you know anything about fig trees or human development, you know how laughable that is, even as you do it. And we also know that there are seasons in life that feel fruitless. We carry these expectations that we can experience a dramatic change in life, the loss of a loved one, of a relationship, of a job, the birth of a child, caring for an ailing parent, that we can experience dramatic health changes in ourselves, and then we can just carry on as if nothing is different. As if we don't need time to grieve, to withdraw, perhaps, to adjust, to acclimate, to heal, to rest. And that this might require less production than by other measures. And so as humans who invariably, right, inescapably, we are thrust into these seasons, like it or not. Life happens. Sometimes it's days, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's years. And we simultaneously hear that landowner's voice in our ear, or perhaps we hear it loud all around us, right? Get back to work. Stop being lazy. You still don't have a job? What's wrong with you? What do you have to show for yourself? Right? Interestingly, this is the voice of the rich man whose vineyard the tree is planted in, but not the voice of the poor man who actually tends the plants each day. How easy it is to criticize from a distance, to assume, to expect, to demand growth now. Produce fruit now, change now. Right? I've got money to make. I've got a career to build. I've got a ladder to climb. I've got a public perception to increase. If there's no fruit, throw it out. Get a new one. We need production. How easy it is to internalize that voice as though it's our own. And in an even more twisted interpretation of this parable, some theologians over the centuries have even made God out to be like the landowner. As though God looks at us during those difficult seasons in life that are unfruitful on the surface, as though we are to be cut down and thrown out. Get a new one. This one's no good. We've equated rest with laziness, and then we've demonized it, made it the opposite of God, opposite of love, opposite of growth, such that those who dare to rest, or who are simply in a season where there is no discernible growth on the surface to the naked eye, that again, they deserve to be thrown out and discarded. As a society, we believe that if someone isn't producing, cut them. We've created a whole new government organization to fire them. But even beyond DOGE, we hardly give a passing thought, if any at all, in our systems to the human themselves. If there are employees or coworkers, about whether it may just be that the conditions in life right now, are a lack of life-giving nutrients in the soil at the roots, not a deficiency in them. Because in our world, again, you are what you do. You are what you produce. You produce, therefore, you have value. And so again, we see rest as the opposite of growth. Growth is good. Rest is lazy and unnecessary. And, well, we know that there should be some rest, but just enough to get you back to work. Again, preferably at the same rate that you were last week. I mean, just think about how guilty you feel when you're resting. And the thought invariably occurs, man, I really should be getting some stuff done right now. The moment we pause, that thought creeps in, regardless of how urgent it actually is. So often we understandably desire growth without rest, without the time and the creation of the conditions for growth. There's even a particular distortion of this where we reduce love itself to having no boundaries, to being endlessly available, having no needs. Even when we have nothing left to give. To love sacrificially means to never truly rest in a restorative way, because that starts to feel selfish. What a twisted version of love we have created. That's not what's in the Gospels. That's not the invitation. But as science now insists, rest is not the opposite of growth, just as therapists now insist, setting boundaries and saying no is not the opposite of love. If we want to grow in ways that are healthy, physically, emotionally, spiritually, we also have to honor our limits. To be present to the myriad stresses of life all around us, and to grow, we need rest. Like, this is literally just biology at a certain level. Anyone who knows anything, for instance, about exercise and physiology knows that to work out the same muscles every day is a recipe for disaster. It won't lead to growth. It will lead to injury and deterioration. It will lead to a decrease of strength and performance. And in fact, it is in the rest that the growth literally happens. Which is to say that if we spend our whole lives constantly doing, being constantly busy, never truly pausing, we are likely to be emotionally and spiritually stunted. That's just a fact. And yet constant motion is what our world sees as growth, as positive. And of course, growth matters. We all want to keep growing. Growth is good in a sense. We're called to grow our whole lives. And in fact, not to get crusty and stuck in our ways just because we're old and don't want to deal with it anymore. Right? We're called to keep learning and changing and deepening our capacities to do the work of love and justice and forgiveness and reconciliation. But sometimes, like the fig tree, we just need an extra year. I don't know, I sat with that sentence for a little bit. A whole year? Like not just a week or a month or even a season, but like give it a year? Sometimes we also take a whole year or more, especially if we're not giving ourselves any real rest, to return to our full selves. But here's what I love about creation and God, and I think is there in this parable, even if not explicitly so. Nothing is wasted. That year isn't a wasted year for the fig tree or for you, just because there's no discernible fruit or the kind of fruit that you want. Or maybe I should make a caveat that it doesn't just take time, again, just as time alone does not heal all wounds. It does take time, and it does take intentionality. Time and the tender care of others. That fig tree isn't left alone and then returned to a year later to see if in its isolation did it happen to become regenerative, somehow grow on its own. No, the parable says, give it a year, and the man tending the tree insists, and let me care for it. Let me spread some life-giving nutrients around its roots. And then let's see what happens. Perhaps in our own in-between seasons or when we are dealing with young, still forming ones, we can put that gardener's skills into practice. As Jeff Chu comments again, we might imagine that a gardener practices patience and hope and trust and discernment, resilience and openness as he tends the roots and the soil. Can we embody these traits as well, he asks. Now, oftentimes, rest, doing nothing, faithfully waiting, doesn't actually mean literally just laying there, like a dead fish on the ground. I mean, I guess it could. Maybe you need to just do that for a little while. But the gardener waters, he weeds, he fertilizes, and modern science is teaching us what happens in the meantime, which is that contrary to the peevish vineyard owner's assertion, again, nothing is wasted. Down below, the fig tree isn't just gathering strength, it's also building relationships. As soil-borne fungi are finding a home in its roots, boosting the tree's capacity to resist disease and take in nutrients. And in return, the tree feeds the fungi. Sometimes we all just need someone to spread a little crap around our roots. Perhaps the compost that we need sounds more like a meal that someone brings to us. or someone sitting down to listen, or give us a foot massage. Perhaps it's getting us up and out to go on an adventure because we can't muster to do it on our own. Perhaps it's someone just reminding us that it's okay to pause from doing and just be unproductive, with no guilt, to simply marvel at that bee rolling around in the pollen like it's drunk, and just stop at wow. Is that not amazing? Doing nothing, rest, Sabbath, getting the nutrients that our bodies and souls need. It looks like giving ourselves to the rhythms that restore us to ourselves, to each other, to the earth, and thus to God. Spend a morning watching the squirrels, marveling at the leaves. Stick your hands in the dirt. Nurture something small, maybe even a seed. Make art for fun. Sing loudly. Go for a walk in the woods or through a prairie. Meditate under a tree. Do yoga or Tai Chi with Bev. Listen to yourself breathing. Come back to yourself. It's not a waste. It's necessary. Whatever it is that restores you to yourself, to others, to God, it will take time and consistency, just like gardening does. We need to be continually surrounded by these nutrients, not just expect to get like some super dose on a vacation once or twice a year. It's about regular rhythms that restore in a world that continue to rip us from our humanity and what we were created for. And what we discover when we give ourselves to such rhythms of rest and restoration is that growth comes as a natural byproduct. It's a truth that we can trust, even when it feels as though we are nothing but that bare tree, or nothing but that acorn or tiny seed. May it be so, for your healing and flourishing, for the healing and flourishing of all the world. Amen.